The general store smelled like lamp oil and tobacco. Hannah Moore stood at the counter with her spine straight and her hands empty, trying to pretend she belonged there. Outside, the Montana winter had turned Coldwater Crossing into a tomb of ice and silence. Inside, men stamped snow from their boots and women fingered bolts of cloth they couldn't afford either. Hannah had walked 3 miles through drifts that came up to her thighs. Her skirt was frozen stiff at the hem. Her fingers were blue. She'd left Luke alone in the shack, wrapped in every blanket they owned, sitting beside a fire that would die before she made it back. He was 7 years old. Old enough to know not to touch the stove. Too young to understand why his mother's face had looked like that when she kissed his forehead and told him to stay put. Amos Pritchard stood behind the counter like a man who owned more than merchandise. He was thick through the middle, clean-shaven, proud. He sold flour and nails and coffee to people who broke their backs on land that didn't care if they lived or died. And he kept a ledger. "I need flour," Hannah said. £5. "And lard if you can spare it." Pritchard didn't move. "You got a coin?" She didn't answer right away. That was enough to answer. "Credit, then," she said quietly. The store wasn't loud, but it got quieter. Conversations died mid-sentence. A woman near the fabric table stopped pretending to shop and just stared. 2 men by the stove leaned in, listening. Pritchard smiled. It wasn't kind. "No coin, no goods," he said. His voice carried like he wanted it to. "That's policy, Mrs. Moore. You know that." "I'll pay when the thaw comes," Hannah said. "I've got seed stored. I can plant." "You've got debt," Pritchard cut in. He pulled the ledger out from under the counter and opened it with ceremony, like scripture. $12 from September. $8 from October. Your husband took credit for tools he never paid back. That makes $20, Mrs. Moore. $20 I'll never see because dead men don't settle accounts. Someone laughed. Just a short bark of sound, quickly smothered. But it was enough. Hannah's face went hot, then cold. "He was sick," she said. "Should have thought of that before he borrowed." Pritchard leaned forward on his palms, playing to the audience now. "A woman who can't keep a man alive shouldn't come begging for handouts. You want charity, try the church." Another laugh. Louder this time. "I'm not asking for charity," Hannah said. Her voice was shaking. "I'm asking for food. I have a son." "Then you should have planned better." Pritchard closed the ledger with a slap. "I'm a businessman, not a benefactor. You want flour, bring money. Otherwise, get out of my store." The room had gone silent again, but this time it wasn't curiosity. It was something worse. Agreement. Permission. The kind of cruelty that happens when good people decide someone else deserves their suffering. Hannah felt something crack inside her chest. Not her heart. Something smaller. Something that had been holding her upright. She turned toward the door. That was when the shadow moved. A man stepped out from the back corner of the store, where the light didn't quite reach. He was enormous, broad through the shoulders, tall enough that he had to duck under the rafters. His coat was bearskin. His beard was long and dark, shot through with gray. He smelled like smoke and snow and something wild. Boone Calder. The mountain man. He didn't say a word. He just walked to the counter, pulled a leather pouch from inside his coat, and set it down. Gold coins clinked against wood. The room held its breath. Pritchard stared at the pouch like it might bite him. Boone didn't wait for permission. He untied the leather cord and spilled coins across the counter, gold eagles that caught the lamplight and gleamed like small suns. $20. Maybe more. Enough to buy every bag of flour in the store twice over. That covers her debt, Boone said. His voice was low, rough from disuse. And enough to keep her fed through spring. Pritchard's mouth worked, but no sound came out. His eyes flicked from the gold to Boone's face and back again, calculating something he didn't dare say aloud. Hannah stood frozen near the door. She didn't understand what was happening. She'd never spoken to Boone Calder. Most people hadn't. He came into town twice a year, maybe 3 times, traded furs for ammunition and sugar, then disappeared back into the mountains. There were stories about him, that he'd killed a man in Wyoming, that he'd lived with Shoshone, that he was half mad from solitude. Nobody knew which parts were true. Well, Boone said. Pritchard swallowed. His showman's smile was gone. Yes. Yes, of course. I'll just. 5 pounds of flour, Boone said. Lard. Coffee. Salted pork. Cornmeal. Beans. Right. Yes. Pritchard moved fast, pulling sacks and tins from the shelves with hands that shook just slightly. The store stayed quiet. Nobody laughed now. Nobody even breathed loud. The 2 men by the stove had turned to statues. The woman near the fabric table clutched her shawl like armor. Boone picked up each item as Pritchard set it on the counter, loading them into a canvas sack without hurry. When everything was packed, he turned to Hannah. Come on, he said. It wasn't a question. It wasn't an order either. It was something in between, an offer that didn't allow for argument. Hannah's legs moved before her mind caught up. She followed Boone out into the cold, into air so sharp it felt like breathing knives. The door swung shut behind them, cutting off the warmth and the stares and Amos Pritchard's humiliation. Snow was falling again. Thick, heavy flakes that erased the world. Boone walked north, away from the road Hannah had taken into town. His stride was long and steady, unbothered by the drifts. She hurried to keep up, her frozen skirt cracking with each step. Wait, she said. I need to, my son. He's at the shack. I have to get back to him. Boone stopped. He turned and looked at her for the first time, really looked, and his eyes were gray like winter sky. Not cruel. Not kind. Just clear. I know, he said. We'll get him. But the road. Forget the road. He started walking again. Hannah hesitated for only a moment, then followed. What choice did she have? Luke was alone. The fire was dying. And this man, this stranger, had just paid $20 to keep her alive. They reached her shack as the light started to fail. It leaned slightly to the left, boards warped by wind and time. Smoke trickled from the chimney, thin, almost gone. Boone pushed the door open without knocking. Luke was sitting exactly where Hannah had left him, wrapped in blankets, his face pale and pinched with cold. When he saw his mother, relief flooded his features. Mama. It's all right, Hannah said quickly, crossing to him. We're leaving. Just for a while. Luke's eyes went to Boone, standing huge and silent in the doorway. The boy's face went uncertain, halfway to fear. Boone crouched down, making himself smaller. He didn't smile. He didn't speak softly. He just looked at Luke the way he'd looked at Hannah, clear and direct. You'll be safe, Boone said. Then he scooped the boy up, blankets and all, and tucked him inside his bearskin coat. Luke disappeared into the folds of fur and wool, swallowed by warmth. His small face peeked out near Boone's chest, eyes wide but no longer afraid. The mountain man's body heat radiated like a stove. Hannah grabbed what she could, a tin cup, a spare shawl, the photograph of her husband she kept wrapped in an oilcloth. Everything else would have to stay. The furniture wasn't worth carrying. The debts would follow her regardless. Boone was already outside, waiting in the snow. The climb began immediately. Not up the road, but straight into the forest, where the trees grew so thick the snow hadn't reached the ground in places. Boone moved through the wilderness like he was reading a map only he could see, around deadfalls, between frozen creeks, under branches bent low with ice. Hannah struggled to keep pace. Her boots weren't made for this. Her dress caught on thorns and low brush. Her lungs burned. She didn't complain. The light died fast. Winter days were short, and they'd started late. By the time full dark settled, Hannah couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. But Boone never slowed. He carried Luke against his chest with one arm and the supply sack over his shoulder, moving upward with the steady rhythm of a man who'd walked these mountains 1,000 times. Hannah's legs trembled. Her skirt was soaked through. She slipped on ice-slick rocks and caught herself on trees, palms scraping bark. Once, she fell to her knees and stayed there for a moment, gasping. Boone stopped. He didn't come back to help her. He just waited, a dark shape against darker trees, until she pushed herself up and kept moving. Hours passed. Or maybe just one. Time felt broken. Then the trees opened up and Hannah saw it, a cabin built into the face of a cliff, stone on 3 sides and timber on the 4th. Smoke rose from a chimney cut through rock. A single window glowed with firelight. Boone pushed the door open and carried Luke inside. Heat rolled out like a living thing. Hannah stumbled across the threshold and nearly collapsed. The cabin was small but solid, one room with a stone fireplace, a wooden table, shelves lined with supplies, furs piled in the corner for bedding. It smelled like pine and wood smoke and something animal but not unpleasant. The walls were chinked tight. No drafts. No gaps. Boone set Luke down near the fire and unwrapped him from the coat. The boy's cheeks were flushed now, color returning. He stared around the cabin with the quiet wonder of a child who'd only ever known cold. "Sit," Boone said to Hannah. She sat. Her legs gave out and she ended up on the floor, back against the wall, shaking from exhaustion and cold and relief she didn't know how to name. Boone moved through the cabin with practiced efficiency. He fed the fire until it roared. He filled a pot with snow from outside and set it on the coals to melt. He unwrapped the supplies from Pritchard's store and set aside cornmeal, salt, and a chunk of pork. Within minutes, he had much cooking, simple, hot, enough. Luke watched him with careful eyes. Hannah watched too, trying to understand what kind of man did this. What kind of man paid a stranger's debts, carried her child up a mountain, and asked for nothing? Boone ladled mush into 2 wooden bowls and handed them over. He didn't take any for himself. Just stood there, firelight carving shadows across his face, waiting. Hannah tasted it. Plain. Warm. Alive. "Thank you," she said. Her voice cracked on the words. Boone nodded once. Then he turned to the door. "Where are you going?" Hannah asked. "Wood," Boone said. "Storm's coming." He went back out into the dark. Hannah heard the steady rhythm of an axe biting into frozen timber, over and over, long into the night. The storm hit before dawn. Hannah woke to wind screaming against stone and the sound of snow hammering the cabin walls like fists. Luke was curled against her side, still sleeping, buried in furs that smelled like earth and smoke. The fire had burned down to coals, but the cabin held its heat. Boone was already awake. He sat near the door, repairing a snowshoe with strips of rawhide, his hands moving with the patience of someone who had nothing but time. When he saw Hannah stir, he nodded toward the pot hanging over the coals. "Coffee," he said. She pushed herself up, joints stiff from the climb and the cold floor. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint, bitter and scalding. It was the best thing she'd tasted in months. The storm lasted 3 days. They couldn't go outside. Couldn't see past the window. The world became the cabin, 4 walls, 1 fire, 3 people learning how to exist in the same small space. Boone didn't talk much. He mended gear, carved new axe handles, sorted through his trap lines in his mind. Luke stayed quiet too, watching the mountain man the way children watch things they're trying to understand. Hannah cooked what little there was to cook. She melted snow for water. She kept the fire going. Small tasks, but they mattered. They kept her hands busy and her mind from circling back to the shack she'd left behind, the debt still hanging over her name, the town that had watched her beg and done nothing. On the second day, Luke finally spoke to Boone. "Do you live here alone?" the boy asked. "Yes," Boone said. "Don't you get lonely?" Boone looked up from the snare wire he was straightening. His gray eyes settled on Luke without anger or impatience. "No," he said simply. Luke thought about that. "My pa died," he said after a while. "I know. Mama says he's in heaven now." Boone didn't respond to that. He just went back to his work, hands steady, face unreadable. Hannah watched the exchange from across the cabin. She didn't know what to make of this man. He'd saved them, fed them, given them shelter. But he hadn't asked for gratitude. Hadn't asked for anything. He moved through the cabin like they were guests he'd expected, not strangers he'd rescued on impulse. On the third night, the wind finally died. Hannah woke in darkness to the sound of silence, so complete it felt like pressure against her ears. The storm had passed. She lay still under the firs, listening to Luke's breathing beside her and the crackle of the fire across the room. Then she heard something else. A cough. Low, rough, quickly stifled. She sat up. Boone was hunched near the fire, one hand braced against the stone hearth. Even in the dim light, she could see he was shaking. "Are you all right?" Hannah asked. "Fine," Boone said. His voice was hoarse. He wasn't fine. Hannah had heard that cough before. She'd heard it from her husband in the weeks before the fever took him. "You're sick," she said. "I'm fine," Boone repeated. He pushed himself upright, swaying slightly, and moved toward the door. "Need to clear the snow. Path'll be buried. You need to rest." "No time for that." He pulled on his coat and stepped outside before Hannah could argue further. Through the window, she watched him wade into snow that came up to his waist, moving toward the woodpile with the shovel in hand. He worked for maybe 10 minutes before he stopped, leaning on the shovel, shoulders heaving. Then he went back to digging. Hannah looked at Luke, still sleeping. She looked at the fire burning low. She looked at the door. Then she stood up, wrapped herself in her shawl, and went outside. The cold hit her like a wall. Hannah's breath turned to ice crystals before it left her mouth. The snow was waist-deep, heavy and wet, the kind that soaked through fabric in seconds. Boone had made it to the woodpile. He was shoveling with mechanical determination, clearing a path one load at a time. But his movements had slowed. Each heave of snow took longer than the last. "Go inside," he said without turning around. "No," Hannah said. She waded through the trench he'd cut, reached the woodpile, and started gathering split logs. Her hands were already numb. She didn't care. She carried an armload back to the cabin, stacked it by the door, then came back for more. Boone stopped shoveling. "You don't need to. You carried my son up a mountain," Hannah said. "I can carry wood." They worked in silence. Hannah made trip after trip, arms burning, lungs aching from the cold. Boone cleared snow from the path to the lean-to where he kept supplies, from the roof overhang, from the area around the door. Sweat soaked through his shirt despite the temperature. His cough came more frequently now, wet and deep. By the time they finished, the sun was up. The weak winter light turned the snow blue-white and blinding. Inside, Boone collapsed onto the bench near the fire. He didn't bother removing his wet coat. Just sat there, shoulders slumped, breathing hard. Hannah pulled the coat off him herself. His shirt underneath was damp with sweat and melted snow. His skin was burning. "You have a fever," she said. "I'll pass." My husband said that too. The words came out harder than she'd meant them. Boone looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. Not agreement. Just acknowledgement. There's willow bark, he said. In the tin on the second shelf. And yarrow in the dried bundles hanging from the rafter. Hannah found them. She'd brewed fever remedies before, too many times. She knew how to strip bark, how to steep it until the water turned bitter, how much yarrow to add for the lungs. She worked quickly, hands steady despite the fear curling in her stomach. Luke woke and watched from the corner, wrapped in his blankets, eyes big. Is he going to die? The boy whispered. No, Hannah said. She didn't know if it was true. Boone drank the tea without complaint. Then he lay down on the furs near the fire and closed his eyes. Within minutes, he was asleep, or unconscious. Hannah couldn't tell which. The fever climbed through the day and into the night. Boone's skin burned hot enough to hurt. He shivered under every fur in the cabin, teeth chattering, muscles locked. Sometimes he muttered things Hannah couldn't understand, names, maybe, or warnings. Once he sat up suddenly, eyes wide and unfocused, looking at something that wasn't there. It's all right, Hannah said, pressing him back down. You're safe. His hand caught her wrist. His grip was weak but deliberate. The boy, Boone said. His voice was a rasp. If I don't. You will, Hannah said. If I don't, Boone continued, there's a cache. 2 miles north. Marked with stacked stones. Enough to get you both through winter. You're not dying. Everyone dies. Hannah felt something fierce rise in her chest, something that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with the simple, stubborn refusal to lose another person to cold and circumstance and the world's indifference. Not today, she said. She kept the fire roaring. She brewed tea every few hours and made him drink it, even when he could barely swallow. She packed snow against his forehead to break the fever. She didn't sleep. Luke helped without being asked. He fetched water. He tended the fire. He sat beside Boone and talked to him in a small, steady voice about nothing, about birds he'd seen, about stories his mother had told him, about the carvings on the cabin walls. The fever broke on the second night. Hannah knew because Boone stopped shaking. His breathing evened out. The delirium passed and left behind something closer to real sleep. She pressed her hand to his forehead and felt the heat receding, still warm, but no longer dangerous. She sat back against the wall and closed her eyes. Relief hit her like exhaustion. Her hands were trembling. She'd forgotten what it felt like to win. When she opened her eyes again, gray dawn light was seeping through the window. Luke was asleep beside her. The fire had burned low. And Boone was sitting up, awake, watching her with those clear gray eyes. You should have slept, he said. His voice was rough but steady. So should you. A ghost of something passed across his face. Not quite a smile. Thank you, he said. Hannah didn't know what to say to that. She'd been thanking him for days, in her mind, in prayers, in every breath she took in this warm cabin instead of freezing in her shack. Now he was thanking her for keeping him alive, and it felt like the ground shifting beneath her. We're even, she said finally. Boone considered that. Then he nodded. All right. He was weak for days after. He tried to hide it, tried to stand too soon, move too fast, take on work his body wasn't ready for. Hannah stopped him. She took over the wood splitting, the water hauling, the endless small tasks that kept them alive. Her hands, soft from a year of grief and hunger, hardened. Blisters formed and broke and formed again. Her arms grew stronger. Luke helped more each day. He learned to stack wood so it wouldn't fall. Learned to pack snow tight for melting. Learned to watch the sky for weather signs the way Boone did, reading clouds like text, sensing storms before they arrived. They fell into a rhythm. Not comfortable, exactly. But functional. Survival. One evening, after Luke had fallen asleep, Hannah and Boone sat on opposite sides of the fire. The silence between them had changed over the weeks, from strange to familiar, from awkward to companionable. It was Boone who finally broke it. "Why'd you stay in Coldwater?" he asked. Hannah looked up, surprised by the question. "It was my husband's land. His dream. He's dead." The bluntness should have stung. It didn't. It was just the truth, stated plainly. "I didn't have anywhere else to go," Hannah said. "And I thought if I could just make it work, if I could prove I wasn't helpless, then people would." She stopped. "It doesn't matter what I thought." "They saw weakness," Boone said. "Predators always do. Pritchard's not a predator. He's exactly that." Boone's voice was quiet but certain. "He's the kind that feeds on people who can't fight back. Town's full of them. Dressed nice. Smiling. Calling it business." Hannah stared into the fire. She thought about the laughter in the store. The way people had looked through her like she was already gone. The way Pritchard had spoken her husband's name was an insult. "Why did you help me?" she asked. Boone was quiet for a long time. Long enough that Hannah thought he wouldn't answer. Then he spoke. "I was in that store once," he said. 10 years back. I'd come down from the mountains with furs to trade. Good pelts. Worth plenty. Pritchard tried to cheat me, figured a man who lived alone was too stupid to know numbers." He paused. "Your husband saw it. He checked the count. Called Pritchard out in front of everyone. Got me a fair price." Hannah's breath caught. She'd never heard this story. Her husband had never mentioned it. "He didn't know me," Boone continued. "Had no reason to help. But he did it anyway. Because it was right." He looked at Hannah directly. "I won't forget my debts." Spring came slowly to the mountains. The snow retreated inch by inch, revealing brown grass and mud and the skeleton shapes of bushes Hannah had forgotten existed. The creeks swelled with meltwater. Birds returned, first the ravens, then smaller things that sang instead of croaked. The world woke up. Boone's strength came back with the thaw. He checked his trap lines, brought back rabbit and marten. He showed Luke how to set snares, how to read tracks in softening ground. The boy followed him everywhere, soaking up knowledge the way dry earth soaks up rain. Hannah watched them together and felt something shift in her chest. Not love, not yet. But the beginning of something. The possibility of it. One morning in early April, Boone came back from checking the southern trail and stood in the doorway, snow still on his boots. "Pass is open," he said. Hannah looked up from the mending in her lap. She'd been expecting this. Dreading it, maybe. The cabin had become familiar. Safe. The thought of leaving it felt like stepping back into cold water. "I need to go back," she said. "To Coldwater. The land." "I know," Boone said. "Pritchard took it. He'll have claimed the debt wasn't settled. He'll have the shack and everything on it by now. Probably." Hannah set down the mending. Her hands were steady. "I can't let him keep it. It's all Luke has. It's his father's name on that deed." Boone nodded slowly. "Then we go back." "We? You think I'd let you walk into that town alone?" Something warm settled in Hannah's chest. Not gratitude. Not anymore. Something deeper. They left 2 days later, taking the trail down through melting snow and mud that sucked at their boots. Luke rode on Boone's shoulders when the way got rough. Hannah carried a pack with supplies and the deed to her land, hidden in her husband's Bible, the one thing Pritchard couldn't have claimed because she'd carried it with her. Coldwater Crossing looked the same. Same crooked buildings, same muddy streets, same smell of horses and wood smoke. But Hannah felt different walking into it. Her back was straight. Her hands weren't shaking. The general store was crowded again. Spring always brought people out of their winter holes, desperate for supplies they'd run out of months ago. Hannah pushed through the door with Boone behind her, Luke holding her hand. The conversation died the moment they entered. Amos Pritchard stood behind the counter, his face going pale and then red when he saw who'd come calling. "Mrs. Moore," he said. His voice had lost its swagger. "I heard you'd. I thought perhaps. You thought I'd died," Hannah said flatly. "You hoped I had. Now that's not. You seized my land," Hannah continued. She walked straight to the counter, her boots leaving mud prints on his clean floor. "You claimed the debt wasn't paid. You took the shack and filed a claim with the land office." Pritchard's eyes flicked to Boone, then away. "The debt was outstanding. You left. I had every right. The debt was paid in full." Hannah pulled the leather pouch from her coat, the same one Boone had used months ago. She set it on the counter with a heavy clink. $20 in gold. Witnessed by everyone in this room last November. And I have the receipt. She didn't, actually. But Pritchard didn't know that. "There was no receipt," Pritchard said, but his voice wavered. "You calling me a liar?" Boone asked. His voice was quiet. Dangerous. The room held its breath. Pritchard's face worked through several expressions: anger, calculation, fear. His eyes swept the watching crowd. Nobody met his gaze. Nobody stepped forward to back him up. "There may have been," Pritchard said finally, "some confusion in the ledger." "I want my land back," Hannah said. "Today. With a signed statement that the debt is settled and the claim is void." Pritchard's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. Around them, the store stayed silent, but it was a different kind of silence than before. This time, people were watching Pritchard squirm. This time, they saw. "The paperwork is already filed," Pritchard said weakly. "The land office can unfile it," Hannah said. "With your signature and your testimony that you made an error." "I don't." Boone stepped forward. Just one step. He didn't touch anything. Didn't threaten. Just stood there, huge and quiet and immovable. Pritchard swallowed hard. "Fine," he said. "Fine. I'll write the statement." He pulled out paper and ink with shaking hands. Wrote 3 lines in a cramped script. Signed his name at the bottom. Slid it across the counter like it burned him. Hannah picked it up, read it carefully, then folded it and tucked it inside her coat. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was steady. Cold. "For your honesty." She turned and walked out. Boone and Luke followed. Behind them, the store erupted into whispers. They went to the land office next. The clerk, a thin man with spectacles, read Pritchard's statement twice, looked at Hannah with something like respect, and stamped the deed returned. By noon, the shack was legally hers again. They walked out to see it in the afternoon light. It looked smaller than Hannah remembered. More broken. The roof sagged worse than before. The door hung crooked. Weeds had grown up through the porch boards. It was cold inside, empty and damp and smelling of mice. Luke stood in the middle of the single room, looking around with solemn eyes. "This is where we lived?" he asked. "Yes," Hannah said. "It's sad." Hannah looked at the cracked window, the stove with rust eating through the iron, the corner where she'd sat and counted corn like prayer. It was sad. It had always been sad. She'd just been too desperate to see it. "Yes," she said again. "It is." She looked at Boone, standing in the doorway, watching her with those clear gray eyes. "I could fix it," she said. "Patch the roof. Replant in the spring. Make it work. You could, Boone agreed. But I don't want to. The words came out simple. True. Final. I don't want to live in a place where people watch me beg and laugh, Hannah said. I don't want to raise my son around people who measure kindness in coins. I don't want to spend another winter wondering if we'll survive it. She walked to Boone, stopped in front of him, looked up into his weathered face. I want to go home, she said. To the mountains. Something shifted in Boone's expression. Not quite a smile. But close. It's a hard life up there, he said. I know. Isolated. Cold. No neighbors for miles. Good, Hannah said. Boone looked at Luke. You want to live in the mountains, boy? Luke nodded immediately. Can I help with the traps? Every day. Then yes. Boone looked back at Hannah. Held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded once, slow and certain. All right, he said. Let's go home. They left Coldwater Crossing that afternoon and didn't look back. Years later, travelers passing through the high country sometimes saw smoke rising from a stone cabin built into the cliff face. They saw a woman with strong hands splitting wood, a boy, nearly grown, checking trap lines, a mountain man teaching him to read the sky. They saw a family that had built itself from scraps and stubbornness and one man's decision to pay an old debt. The winters were still hard. The isolation was real. But they were fed. They were safe. They were together. And the cruelty of distant towns never reached them again. The mountains kept them. And that was enough. If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more tales from the Wild West where honor still meant something. Thanks for listening.